Gotcha. I recording now, so sorry about that. I'm
Okay,
glad
no
you
worries.
caught me on that.
Thank you.
And John,
So,
could you also remind people to mute themselves if they're not talking so that it doesn't, the
right.
goes better
We
that
said that once, but we'll do it again. It's always an issue to remind people that they need to mute themselves because these attenuate with the signals going through, not to mention you get some feedback.
Don, before you leave the emergency declaration,
Yes.
I wanted to bring up. I was out today, being that it was such a beautiful spring day, for a bike ride. I passed on the Riverwood streets and on the Forest Preserve Trail 41 people. One person was wearing a mask. Of those people that I passed, there were quite a few who were traveling in groups who were not practicing social distancing. And honestly, I felt a little unsafe on our own streets within Riverwood. And
I can't hear anything.
Okay. Yeah, Mike, you're garbling just a little. If you could, I think Mike was saying that he was out, saw people on the Forest Preserve path, and only one person was wearing a mask.
It was not only the Forest Preserve path, it was the South Riverwood streets.
Okay.
17 of the people were on the South Riverwood streets, and not a single person had a mask on, and there were quite a number who weren't clearly not families, who were traveling in groups and not practicing social distancing. And I think to ensure the safety of the community, we ought to be considering some additional steps that we may need to take. And I'm wondering what the mayor's authority is under the emergency declaration to do something such as instituting, let's say, something like a $25 fine for people who are not on their own property or in a closed vehicle who are not practicing social distancing and not wearing masks. Does the mayor have the authority to do that? And if the mayor doesn't, does the board have any appetite for imposing something like that within the community? I think at this particular point, it's really inherent on the safety, for the safety of the community to consider more than what we're doing now.
Okay, well, one, the governor has only requested that people wear it when they're in general groups. That being said, to more directly answer your question, yes, I could issue an order requiring the wearing of masks. The fines, I'm not so sure about. I'll defer to council. It might have to be some generic fine that is already included in the fine schedule, but the emergency powers enable me to do virtually anything that would be directly related to fighting the COVID virus. So requiring the wearing of face masks, I think, would fall within that.
So I am not as concerned about masks outdoors, but the social distancing, though, is imperative. And so I'm far more concerned about that. If you're going to go out for a jog and you're not getting anywhere near anyone else, the mask is really for you to be protecting others rather than the protection of yourself. So if you're doing proper social distancing, the mask doesn't really offer anything additional. However, I share Trustee Clayton's concern about the social distancing, and I know wasn't the city of Chicago entertaining tickets or something like that? Certainly, I think that our police, if they encounter groups, should tell them to disperse.
Yeah,
Well,
I just want to echo Cheryl. I agree completely if you're in groups, but if I'm walking my dog all by my lonesome, I don't think that there's a dire need for me to wear a mask if I'm going nowhere near any other groups.
My concern is that you don't know that. You don't know that you're going to be not meeting anybody else or going near anybody else when you're out walking.
Well, I can completely control who I go near.
Right, exactly.
Right, I'm saying that I can control that.
Well, I certainly don't know how you would, when you're out jogging and you're going along the Springs River Trail, how you're going to control who you pass. Let me relay a story to you from today. I was biking down the trail, and there were people on both sides of the trail when I needed to get by. And I asked if they would all move to one side of the trail so that I could get around them using social distancing. And one person laughed, and the other person called me a name that rhymes with some part of my body. And I think people are not taking it seriously, and I think it's incumbent upon us to go further than just what the governor has required, because I don't think under many circumstances you can control who you come into contact with. Certainly, I couldn't control it today just biking on South Riverwood streets. I passed any number of people who were out walking, and none of them who had masks on, and none of them seemed particularly concerned about social distancing.
So I will tell you, Mike, that not having medical staff, I'm reluctant to go farther than the governor, and I'm sure you can appreciate that. Henry, you know I'm going to have to call on you for your opinion on this. I certainly want to put out a letter and say things, Mike. I do agree with you there. But as to go to the extent of making it a penalty, I am a bit reluctant to do that until people with direct medical advisors would be saying it. Henry?
I think us getting ahead of what both the federal government and state government and county have all put out there is a mistake. They have recommended masks just recently, and I agree with Trustee Chamberlain that the purpose originally and probably still remains to protect others rather than yourself. But I don't think we have enough information for us as a small village. Certainly could never implement it and monitor it, but I don't think we as a small village should get ahead of all three governments that are ahead of us. The social distancing, everyone has agreed to. The masks are recommended, and that's as far as they've gone. It might be nice to continue to push it, but I don't think we ought to do anything in a legislative or punitive way.
Yeah,
Could I
Go
ask
ahead,
Chief
Cheryl.
Dano a question? Chief, how are you directing your officers as far as them encountering groups of people outdoors?
We tell them to disperse. We haven't had a lot of complaints of that nature where towns surrounding us, Highland Park and Deerfield, they have parks. They're getting a lot of complaints there. I haven't observed very much of what's been described. Thorngate has a lot of people walking around in there, and I've driven through every day and I've seen people crossing the street to avoid each other. I haven't seen it in South Riverwoods myself. You know, I'm sure Michael has. I just haven't seen it. But if I do, I would tell them to disperse, as with my officers. I'm reluctant to write tickets for it. That would require more interaction between us and the public, and we're trying to limit that. So I think just verbal would suffice rather than ticketing, and we'll continue to do that. The calls that we are getting almost daily are on the golf course. People are out there hitting balls. So I was out on Deerfield Golf Course this afternoon at about 3 o'clock telling the person he needed to go home, who feigned that he didn't know that there was an order in place, but I think he got the message and he apologized.
You know, Mike, I would say if you could, you won't always have your cell phone, but if you did, call Bruce and ask him to have an officer come by where you can identify the people that did not respond appropriately. And while we won't necessarily ticket or arrest them, I do think having the police point out to them that it's a serious matter to not be following the governor's orders for social distancing, we should do something. So that's where it sits. If you want to bring it up at the next meeting, please do. I would prefer the board act on it if it was going to be as it sits right now, but I will say I have the power. And if the governor says it, you better believe we'll be doing it. I've got masks here for staff, et cetera, because of his encouragement to do it. And I've got them in the car as well for myself and my wife, so.
Mayor Norris, maybe our next bulletin that goes out, it could be a slightly different format where you are emphasizing the social distancing and the recommendation to wear masks. Because I will say the health department ones I'm starting to delete them because they're getting just a little too depressing for me.
Mhm.
So perhaps something in a slightly different format as a reminder would be
I
good.
agree. I mean, I've tried to strike a fairly positive tone, and the one I've been writing and gone back and forth because things have been changing as I'm writing it, now will be a little stronger on the negative message of some people not doing it, because some people are basically starting to blow it off because, oh, gee, it's been this long and nothing's really happened. So, yeah, we got to make sure. I definitely need to use the bully pulpit as much as possible to encourage people to be doing the right thing. Okay, one more comment each on that if anybody has it. If not, then we'll move on. I received from Shops manager, Shops and Colonial Court, a request for us to waive the special use fee for the duration because their tenants were having problems. I've talked with a couple of the trustees and with council, and we're all of one mind that I'm certainly willing to waive the fee, but I want to make sure it benefits the tenants, not the landlords in this case. So I'm going to have to hear a little bit more of how they're looking at it and make sure that it can help the businesses that are under stress. We don't have a lot of direct things we can do, but I think that is an appropriate without being a terribly expensive item. So I'll keep you advised on that. Probably have them appear at the next meeting. Rick, your face appeared.
Yes, I just have, and I sent you an email, you, Bruce, and Rob, an email earlier this evening. You probably didn't read it. I don't know if you had a chance to, but it has to do with the amount of ground signs that are now popping up for Sarpinos. As a matter of fact, I was waiting at the light and I saw the guy put 2 more in the ground. He waved to me. He was very nice. He waved to me and smiled, and I didn't say, you're violating an ordinance, because they're struggling as it is. And I guess my question is to you and Bruce Huvard and whoever, can we, I hate to tell them to take the signs out because they're struggling as it is, but can we reduce our ordinance temporarily, or allow them to have X number of signs or something along that? And does the board have to vote on that, or is that something you can do as a mayor? And how does the board feel about it? I don't know. There's a lot of signs out there.
Are these
I
signs,
think I can do it under between my normal powers and the enforcement.
Your superpowers?
That's right. So, where I'm going to have anybody who lives off of Thorn Meadow or within a half mile of the river. So, yeah, what's the sense of the board? Again, I'm willing to be a little bit lenient. Does anybody have an objection to that? Let me word it that way. Leave it a little while maybe. We just won't catch it quite as quickly.
If you're going to do this, and I have no objection, I would do 2 things. One, I would do it at 30-day intervals. And second of all, if you're going to permit it for them, you need to find some way to publicize it to any other commercial establishment that has a right to have signs.
And you're right, Henry. That's a very good point.
And to that, I would also limit the number of signs then, because you don't want 50 signs for each place. And Sarpinos probably has, to take a guess, they probably have somewhere between 12 and 20 signs out there right now. So.
No, and I don't think they're in as much jeopardy being a carry-out pizza place in the first place as some of the others. So, but everybody's having difficulty. So I think it's something. Let me work on it, but I will try to come up with something to make it work through. Oh my goodness, I got a Bruce hand.
all right.
All right, thanks, John.
Yeah, Bruce, did you want to say something, or was it just you playing with your computer?
No, it's just the latter.
Okay. We have been in discussions, Trustee Chamberlain, Trustee Clayton, and I, with Brushwood, where rather than giving them a donation for programs, that we're trying to work out a symbiotic relationship where we can share services and skills of some of their workers and ours, et cetera, some of our facilities. Mike has taken on to working with their president to try and put together a list on that. frankly, can see where that could be a real plus. If nothing else, we've been decorating the building here with some of their artwork. And they're very interested in putting on some programs here or in some of our other facilities, such as at the restoration area. So I will bring it to you with a little more meat on those bones, but I think overall it sounds like a pretty good program. Then finally, something Henry and I discussed, a couple of residents have raised questions about yard waste burning during all of this. Henry didn't think that was necessarily a problem, but did think we had to look at controlled burns because that can be larger burning. Talked to the ecologist, and he said that we could wait a year on all of these. None of these have to go forward now. So my thought was that since, and again, Henry, don't let me put words in your mouth, neither he nor I thought it was a major risk that unless people were complaining once they got notice of a controlled burn, we'd let it go forward. If there was a problem, then we'd hold off. Does anybody have any objections to that policy? I will tell you that the chief is probably the only one who has a point to object because we're talking about doing a controlled burn at the restoration area. So we just have to make sure it's not blowing across the roads and everything else. So
Do we know if there are any permits out for controlled burns besides the stuff that the village is doing?
I am not aware of any right now. Those were the only ones that Steve knew about, and they get scheduled through him. So I don't
Yeah.
believe there are any more scheduled. Cheryl, do you know?
Yeah, Joanne would have that list. I can tell you there were a few that were scheduled, mine included, and my property is just too wet. So I think that's what happened with some of the other ones. So that may work in our favor.
Yeah, Steve was very surprised that the burn on the island in the parking area here was successful, as wet as it's been. So,
Well, I don't have a problem holding back prescribed burns. I mean, I think it'll be hard to police the landscape waste burning. I don't think there's that much of that to begin with, but.
no, I don't either. It's just, again, I've had the complaints. And I wanted to make sure, because we're not in normal times, and we are dealing with a severe respiratory disease. So, okay. Then finally, to pass on a little bit from the governor's call to the mayors this afternoon, I won't give you the exact numbers because they don't add up right. And I checked my numbers against what the Lake County Municipal League wrote down, and they wrote down the same numbers. I think he might have done his arithmetic backwards. But we have approximately 12,000 hospital beds in the state. 43% of those are open right now. Of the 2,700 approximately ICU beds, 35% are open. 57% of the ventilators are still unused right now. Take that all with a grain of salt, however, because it varies greatly depending on where you're at. The Rockford area has 69% of their ICU beds unused, while the northern suburbs have only 17% unused. Chicago is a little below 25%. So it varies. The more rural areas, as you might imagine, have much less COVID at this time. So, bottom line, we haven't reached the overwhelmed point yet. But they're thinking that we would probably be peaking somewhere around the middle of the month. So we have another week to go. So let's just keep our fingers crossed. Are there any visitors wishing to address the board? Okay, we did not receive any emails.
John, I have a question.
Yes, Henry.
About a month ago, we met to discuss the financial situation with the village, and it's been a month. Do you have any update on the recommendations that were made at that meeting?
Well, Mike and Cheryl and I had worked on that, and I know Mike was working it a bit, and it was basically holding off on the property tax increase until fall with some very interesting numbers. We looked at increasing it more, but right now, I've got to say, I think we need to meet all over again and rethink what we're doing, because I think property values are likely to take a hit. They're certainly not going to be going up. And I'd sort of like to know where the economy is going before we make a recommendation to be increasing property taxes or others. Mike, you're leaning closer. You have a...
No, it was my understanding that we have to wait until the fall. We have until November before we decide on a property tax increase. But to directly answer your question, Trustee Hager, I think we tested quite a number of, since that meeting, we tested quite a number of different alternatives for a combination of the property tax, the gas tax, and the internet tax, and so on and so forth. And we had come to some conclusions that were significant with tax increases that are significantly higher than the ones that we had talked about when we were all together. However, still within what appears to be a very affordable range per household. And I think our intent was to come back with a recommendation to the board in the coming weeks. It's just been impossible to get everyone together, including Nathan, in order to kind of talk through the alternatives. But this just goes to show that one of the things that we had talked about when we were all together was that we had to prepare for potential downside risk. And unfortunately, we are experiencing the downside risk when it comes to the sales tax numbers.
It was the concept that Mike Haber brought forward to have whatever we do, make the police department cost neutral. Is that still a priority?
That's not feasible.
Yeah, Henry, that would be a tremendous increase. I don't think we need to go that far. We would start having surpluses that are probably larger. But what I think is that Mike has done most of the work for us. I want to try to talk with he and Cheryl and get the report out to the rest of the board. Because Mike, you've done the work. We might as well let them see what we're thinking. But I agree, we weren't going to act until fall.
I would just add the scenarios we were looking at basically put us back at zero, with then a possibility of revenue in some other areas to potentially go above that.
Yes, Henry, the best way to answer your question is that the scenarios we looked at included the combination of a property tax increase and the surplus that's generally developed by the rest of the income and revenue that we have, so that matched the police department expense growth. So we are looking to try to figure out how to do that. It's just that it would require enormous doubling, tripling, quadrupling of our property tax in order to try to catch up to the police department. It's just not feasible.
I would ask then that we have an interim report prior to some decision in fall. This is, to me, a significant issue, and I'm not comfortable waiting another 6 months.
No, I totally agree with that.
It is, Henry. Hey, things have been crazy lately, so that hasn't been as far up as I'm glad you're reminding me of it. And we'll try to get that out in the next week or two. But again, I got to get Cheryl and Mike, so.
Just an ancillary topic to that, one of the things that we had talked about was the conversion of the public streets to private streets, and we were awaiting an opinion from the village attorney, as I recall. So it might be useful to know where that's at.
So I am going to put something together for you. My original opinion was that the state law allows us to vacate streets. I haven't found anything that says we can't. There are some potential arguments out there, which I'll mention when I put together a brief report, but the basic theory I outlined a long time ago, which was that the municipal code allows us to vacate streets by a supermajority vote, is still the law. So I'll put that together. I've been sidetracked myself in the last 3 or 4 weeks, but basically my preliminary conclusion from a long time ago, after I looked at all the unique situations in which the streets came into the village, none of those situations to me came to a point where they would trump the underlying state scheme for how we deal with streets. So I'll make that clear in a hopefully more of a short memorandum to the board.
Okay, any more questions of me or council? Okay, then, moving on to action items. Item A, under new business, approval of Ravinia Green Water Tower painting bid recommendations. Mr. Engineer?
Well, everybody hopefully got our recommendation. We bid the water tower painting. We had bid this previously in 2016, but didn't move forward with the project at that time. So we bid it again this year. The low bid did come in a bit over our estimate. We just basically didn't add enough to the bid from 2016 to keep up with where the market's at. The main thing is when I met with the cellular carriers about relocating their equipment, they made clear to me that, you know, given the current situation, there could be some federal declaration that you know, telecommunications can't be interrupted for painting of towers and these sorts of things. They have not since then told me that that's happened, and what I can find, I don't see any place where the federal government has made such a declaration. But if they do, and for some reason we can't proceed with the project, we did put it into the bid specifications that we can cancel the contract without penalties. So we're at least covered from that. So our recommendation is to authorize the award of the construction contract for the Ravinia Green Water Tower painting to Jetco Limited in the amount of $158,410.
Okay, do I have a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve that, but I do have a question once.
Oh, I was going to let conversation go through. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Rick?
So I know that when Deerfield painted their water tower, a temporary tower sprouted up next to it, and somebody moved all of the antennas that were on the water tower to the temporary tower. They painted the tower and then they moved them back. I don't know who paid for that. I don't know if the carriers paid for that or if Deerfield paid for that. But I guess the secondary question is, if they're not going to put any kind of temporary facility up while the tower's being painted, how long is the tower painting going to take? And what's that going to do to coverage in the village? Because there's a lot of people, I'm one of them, that does not have a home phone system, a landline, and I don't know if my signal's coming from that tower or coming from some other tower, or maybe both at different times. So those are my questions.
So when I met with the carriers, it was specifically for getting with the carriers and the Ravinia Green folks for where they're going to put their temporary facilities. So the plan is
Perfect.
They erect their temporary towers, they move their equipment over there. It may have just been noise making on their part that, hey, we might not have to do this. But yeah, the plan is to put the temporary towers just immediately north of the water tower.
Okay, thank you.
Could I also ask, we put this off, as you had mentioned previously. Is there any benefit to us to doing that again, or should we just go ahead with it now?
Well, we're not seeing any giant lump in the future, and I don't think things will necessarily get cheaper. They could, obviously. The economy is going to do some things that none of us know in the next 6 months if this virus ever goes away. So
there is a reason. I'm sorry, there is a reason to do it now. I'm sorry, John, I didn't mean to interrupt. For two reasons. One is that we did agree in the sale of our leases to Landmark that we would do the work within 2 years. And the other reason is that it doesn't make sense to try and get a third carrier up there only to interrupt them 3 months after they move in to say, oh, now you got to move off again. The whole point was to sort of get this done so then we could go to a carrier and not have to deal with this and find a third carrier.
so that does strike me as a good reason to be doing it now.
Well, and I would also say that given the fact that most contractors are now at a diminished capacity because of the work is not there, when the work does come back, they're going to be ultra busy and prices are probably going to go up, not down. So just my professional opinion as a contractor.
Oh, that's an even better reason. Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, roll call, please,
Yeah,
on a vote.
I just have,
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I have a question. It's really insignificant, but just out of curiosity, is there any discussion on what exactly the paint job is going to look like and what's going to go on there? Is there a Riverwoods logo or what?
Well,
No,
we would just be painting it plainly, I think, but Ravinia Green slash Corp, what is it? Whatever they are, Corp One.
Club
Talk
Corp.
to us, but I don't think it'd be a lot of money.
Club Corp.
Club Corp, thank you.
That's an interesting point you raise, Eric. We were going to just, I think the idea was to paint it as close to the exact color as it is now, so no one notices it. Club Corp had talked about whether they could put their name on it. There's some case law that using, public property to advertise private interest is an issue. I had suggested maybe putting the name Ravinia Green on the tower, because that's a sort of a subdivision in a neighborhood of an area within the village. And Club Corp thought that would be fine. I never got to the point of asking them what their contribution was going to be. Now that we have a bid amount, I guess someone could go and ask them if the board thought that having, I wouldn't be comfortable having a proprietary name like Club Corp. I mean, it could sell it, someone else could be there. That would be, I think, not in the interest of the village, not in the public interest. If the board felt that Ravinia Green conveyed something useful to the image of the village, I could see an argument for it. I mean, certainly Riverwoods, although I don't think Club Corp wants to put Riverwoods up there, but Ravinia Green is kind of a possibility because of the historical association of that area. And I guess this would be a time to ask the board if you thought that was something to explore.
Well, we've been exploring it. So far, they haven't really offered anything. I don't know if we want to ask the board tonight, or does anybody have any objections to Ravinia Green? Let me put it that way.
Well, I don't have an objection if they want to give us some money to put it
Well,
up there.
yes. Cheryl, that's a given.
For free, and then I want to know how much are we talking?
Well,
And then I can answer your question.
The only thing I can tell you is I asked if they were willing to pay for the entire paint job, and they weren't willing to do that.
Okay.
of the name.
No, of the entire tower. And I said, come back to me if you've got something, and they haven't come back yet. They brought it up first.
I think you have to ask Pat to ask the painter how much it's going to cost to put Ravinia Green on there, and then go back to them and see if they want to pay for it. I don't think the village should pay anything to put his name up there.
I agree.
And right now it looks like a golf ball on a tee.
Yep.
And is that what we're going to do, or are we just going to paint it white? Or
No, it's going to follow the existing color scheme is what was in the bid.
Okay.
Would they be interested in it saying Ravinia Green, comma, Riverwoods, Illinois?
Well, you know what? At this point, I'll go back to them and talk. And I think it's a matter that I've got to just plain do it right now. They should have time. They're not able to open to do anything. So.
Well, my guess is that since they're not collecting any revenue, they're probably not going to want to pay anything at all.
I know.
This is probably a
They
time
might
where
want to pay us later.
it's probably best to just put back what's there and leave it at that.
Well, that's the direction we're planning on, but I'll talk with them to see if we can't get something. And I won't make any comment on how come the CTA has all those signs all over the buses, the trains, and the bus stops.
That's a different fiefdom in that area of the world.
That's true. Their mayor can get their haircut today, and I can't.
They have different rules.
And on that note, I have a roll call, please, on the approval of the Ravinia Green Water Tower painting bid recommendation in amount not to exceed $160,000. Is that good, Pat?
Yeah.
Trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton.
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein.
Aye.
Trustee Haber. Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Item B is an ordinance proposing the establishment of Village of Riverwoods Special Service Area Number 34 for road improvements benefiting certain properties on Kingswood Court and providing for public hearing and other procedures. Even though I normally don't want to waive first reading on this, since it's basically just talking about establishing and setting the times for hearings, I will ask for a motion to waive first reading.
John, is anyone here from there? Anyone on the call?
No, there's not tonight that I'm aware of.
Oh,
Second.
I'll move that we, I moved.
To waive first reading. I heard you the first time. Thank
Sorry.
you. And I take Cheryl as moving to second the motion. All those in favor of waiving first reading signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? First reading is waived. We now need to consider a second reading and adoption of the ordinance. Discussion?
I guess I could just point out that this calls for a hearing date. I think we put in the board meeting, the second board meeting in June is June 16th. By state law, the hearing date had to be at least 60 days after the adoption of this ordinance. So there's a long period of time before we even have a hearing. I have been in touch with a couple of the residents in the area. I think Trustee Hollander sort of initiated the discussions with them. I've given them a couple of detailed memos explaining how this works because we weren't able to meet. A lot of times I might have had a meeting at their homes, but we couldn't. This is, as I said, I think in the memo in the packet, this is the same template we're sort of using for everyone. There are 9 properties. We have a potential annual levy up maximum of $1,000 per home with an escalation clause like we have in some of the other SSAs. They also are considering a major initial rehabilitation project. That's really why they're coming together to do this. The project would require issuing bonds. We've provided a maximum amount of $200,000. The preliminary estimate from the engineer was about 110 or 15,000, but they've been talking about some drainage improvements. So we gave them some extra room to do that. You'll see we put in a maximum interest rate for the bonds that we might issue, a maximum duration. All those maximums are things parameters we have to put in there by state law. We don't have to borrow that much money. We could borrow less. We hope we get a lower interest rate. We hope there's still interest rates when we go to borrow the money. So they're hoping to get they think the road's in pretty bad shape. They're hoping to get the work done, I would say, later in the summer, by which time, hopefully, some things have returned to normal. So basically, it's a flat tax, just like our other road SSAs. It's pretty much the same program. The hearing would be in June. After that, we'd distribute petitions to them and ask for the requisite number of residents to sign petitions in favor of the SSA.
3 quick things. One, to my knowledge, all the residents on the street are in favor of this, so there's not going to be much problem that way. Second, second of all, the street is in pretty bad shape. And third, they already have someone who's going to be doing the construction. They've already bid that out and have someone in line for it.
Great. Hey, are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, then I would like a roll call, please, on an ordinance proposing the establishment of Village of Riverwood Special Service Area Number 34 for road improvements benefiting certain properties on Kingswood Court and providing for a public hearing and other procedures.
Trustee Chamberlain.
Aye.
Trustee Clayton.
Aye.
Trustee Goldstein.
Aye.
Trustee Haber. Trustee Hollander.
Aye.
Trustee Jamerson.
Aye.
Ordinance 200409.
Right, thank you. Item C is a little different. Council will explain it, but basically, we're asking the board to determine whether or not the proposed site plan change that Discover has proposed constitutes a minor amendment to our agreement or a major amendment, which would mean that it's got to go before the board, et cetera. Oh, Cheryl, I believe Cheryl made the second. Jerry just asked who seconded on the last motion.
Yes,
So,
that was me.
I thought so, thank you. So Bruce, I'll turn it back over to you and probably Pat a little bit as well.
So somewhere in the packet, I don't have it open in front of me. I'm not quite that skilled yet. I need 2 screens, I think. There is a drawing or something from Discover that shows that they would like to expand the, what we call the north parking garage. It's a parking structure that's at the north end of the property, 75 feet in a westerly direction. It's basically the same corners. They just add structured parking, which I think is on 3 levels in that structure. When this was approved back in 2001, they originally came to us with a structure that was the full size, that included this extra 75 feet. And they were trying to save money. The project was very big, and I think they also were trying to figure out how much parking they really needed. And they determined that they could reduce the parking structure by 75 feet. So after the board approved the original entire development with the special use amendment and all kinds of stuff, 3 or 4 months later, we came back and we amended the special use and substituted new drawings that showed the garage as it presently exists, which is the smaller version. In between, we had to go through a public hearing with the Plan Commission. We received comments. There were residents expressed some concern about, especially a couple of residents who no longer live in the village, but at the time were active, about what they would see at the parking garage. And there was a lot of fine tuning with the landscaping plan, the landscaping on a berm. The berm in the final iteration tapered down, so it hit the structure till the structure ended, and then it tapered down to the level of the surface parking when the parking garage was reduced in size. I haven't been over there. I don't know how that landscaping has grown up in all these years. There was what they call a sightline study where you could see what the impact would be on some few adjoining properties. Without going into it, I'm thinking the landscaping has matured quite a bit. There might be a few properties, I don't know which ones those would be, that could be affected visually by seeing a structure, 75 feet more of the structure than they see now. I'm not exactly sure about that. And then, so those are the sort of questions that you would always play with, what's going on here, what should be done to ameliorate the impact. From an overall zoning perspective, the number of square feet in the FAR, this is an immaterial change in the overall site plan. But the parameters that we use to look at whether a change could be approved without going to a public hearing, in other words, without going to the Plan Commission and the whole works, was between a minor amendment and a major amendment. And with the development of this size, we wanted to have a fairly long list of things that would guide us in the future just for this example. So we would know whether we could not bother with the Plan Commission hearing, say it's a minor amendment and approve it at the board level, or whether it should go back to the Plan Commission. We can't, when you look at the list, I think I cited it in the memo in the packet, there's probably 11 examples of minor amendments. A typical example is not one where you increase the amount of building structure on the site. There are a lot of other examples, but most of them sort of tend in the other direction rather than you're actually increasing the amount of building. However, in this particular case, the entire board looked at this once before and approved the original plan with the larger building. And not at our urging, it was at Discover's urging, we approved a revision to reduce the building. So we sort of looked at this and thought, this is kind of a very odd baby. Maybe it really doesn't require a full-blown analysis. It's kind of going back to what had been there before. We have a site plan, we have documents that showed what it was going to look like. Ultimately, the way the special use ordinance works for Discover, it is a board decision whether a proposed change is a major or minor. If you determine it's minor, then you will receive the next submittal. You'll make the decision and approve it. And with a resolution, we can substitute a couple of project documents for the ones that are in the master list, and it's done. And if the board determines that it's a major amendment, then they have to notice, go through the Plan Commission, have a public hearing, and go that route. So the reason it's before you tonight is not to make up your mind whether you think the entire improvement is the right thing to do, whether you should accept it, whether you should decide on the landscaping. Now, the purpose tonight is simply the threshold question: is this major or minor? If it's major, then they have to prepare a package for the Plan Commission. If it's minor, take a look at what's in the package, determine what other facts you need, and then they should come back to the board, when you're ready and when they're ready, so that you can really consider their request fully.
Okay, are there any questions
question.
from the board? Yes, Cheryl?
So if I understand correctly, the real difference between it being minor and major as far as effect is to have a public hearing. And if this is going to go forward almost immediately, I don't know what the timing is, a public hearing is probably not a practical thing that could actually occur. I mean, we could hold one, it's just that I don't think anyone would come.
That's why we ultimately sort of just said, maybe in this case, because of the history involved here, that this could be treated as a minor amendment, partly for that reason.
So I'm looking at the aerial photo of this area, and there appears to really only be one house to the west that also looks like it has a lot of shielding. And since it was already part of the original plan and it was removed at their request, I think I would consider this minor. But I would also, so here's my question, and I hate to keep putting my contractor hat on, but I'm wondering what their plan is for building this garage addition, because it looks to me like the only way they're going to be able to do that is to extend some kind of a service road, temporary service road around the north side of the existing parking structure in order to get the equipment that's going to be required in there to do that, which means they're going to tear up everything there's a lot of mature, it appears from the aerial photo, a lot of mature vegetation that is now shielding the south end of Thorngate. And so I would want to make sure that whatever they do to build this, that they put back at least what they've damaged, if not more, on that north end, so that those neighbors are not looking at this parking structure all over again.
Yeah, let me modify my statement somewhat, because that's such a good point, that you can tell Discover that you think this should be a minor amendment, but you're going to base your final decision on what they show you. So rather than say we're stuck with this, whether you say we think it's minor, but these are some questions, bring back all this material, let us look at it, and if we feel comfortable that we can approve it based on what you show us as minor, then we'll go forward that route. And that way you'll have some ability to look at the effect of exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see photos from the existing parking garage to the west and to the north to see what those sight lines look like. I think it's minor, but I'd like to see that, and then I'd like to know how they're going to construct this thing, because it's landlocked except for the north end.
It sounds
building locked, actually.
Sounds a great deal like a motion to continue subject to obtaining more information, which is a perfectly fine response. Frankly, I thought you probably were going to want more anyway. So is there any...
If that's a possibility, that's what I think we should do, in my opinion.
That Siri heard you over here, Rick too. So.
Are you making that as a motion, Rick?
I'll take that as a motion to continue
Sure.
with additional information, including overhead photographs and plan on how they're going to put the road through, etc.
Yeah.
Do I hear a second?
How they're going to build it.
Okay. And I think that's appropriate. Any other comments or questions? Certainly you can pass on to Pat or me anything else you would like to see. You don't necessarily have to come up with it tonight, but are there any other comments or questions from the board? Henry?
Then I'm understanding that we're in agreement this is minor unless they do something that would cause a visual problem. Is that correct?
I would say that we're thinking we don't know if it's minor till we know exactly what they're talking about doing and how they're going to do it. Does that
Well-
make sense?
There seems to be a consensus to try and treat it as minor, but the motion wasn't to determine it was minor tonight. The motion was to get information. And then at that point, unless there's something that really upsets the apple cart, then the board could say, okay, it's minor and let's
Yeah,
go
I
on.
mean, that Henry, if your point is that most of us think it's minor, but we want to be sure on a couple of points, I think that's an honest statement. If we for sure we're going to say, no, it's major, then that's what we should do tonight.
It gives us a little leverage to let them know that we think that it's minor, but we need to have the landscaping in a way
Yep.
that's going to be to our benefit. And if they can't provide the landscaping to our benefit, it may not be minor.
Well, remember,
Well-
you can always say no if they don't give us the landscaping you want anyway, but I hear you. Any other comments from the board? Then all those in favor of continuing the determination and obtaining additional information signify by saying aye.
I
Opposed? None are opposed. Cheryl, I liked your background with the university stadium there. So, okay.
Illini.
Yes, oh, great. And at least it doesn't come through your head like the center field does on the Chief. But anyway, oh, I can't say Chief and Illinois at the same time now. I'll be arrested. Okay, standing committee reports. Trustee Haber is not here. Trustee Chamberlain.
I guess mine did not get included in the packet. I
It
sent
should
it to
be.
you.
Yours was. It was at the very end, I thought.
Oh,
It's there.
oh, it is? Okay, then that's all I have.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, Trustee Jamerson, on the other hand, did not have a report.
Yeah, we don't have a report. Megan was not feeling
Right.
well. I don't think it was because of the virus, but she just wasn't there, and it's early in the month, and so we
Yep.
don't have one. I'm guessing we don't have a lot of construction happening.
No, we were holding off on permits and things for a while anyway, so.
We
and
are,
yes, we think she's okay, but we're not taking anybody sick around here for any reason at all.
just to let the rest of the board know, we have temporarily suspended indoor inspections. We are still allowing exterior inspections. There was a webinar yesterday that I actually haven't connected with Rob yet to see if he was able to watch it, but Henry
was not.
He wasn't.
He was not able to see it. I saw it.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
anyway,
I missed it.
Henry saw it, and the webinar was on how to, do safe inspections. So I think there's a way to do that and keep everybody safe. We just have to lay down some rules. And the most important one right now that I know of, I'm sure Rob has other people that are pestering him, but is Sweet Basil. They are evidently ready to have a final inspection. And I think it would be good for us to be able to accommodate them if it's safe to do so. So we're working on that. I'm working with Rob and the mayor and trying to figure out a way to do that.
Okay, Trustee Goldstein.
I have no report.
Okay, Trustee Hollander.
Two things for which I have absolutely no obligation to do. One was the seminar, the webinar, which, just for your information, related to doing remote permitting, the use of either video cameras, laptops, iPads, or regular cameras, and then sending the information into someone like Rob. And they were able to do this throughout the country in order to allow permitting outside the houses. They were a little bit hesitant to do anything inside, and there were a lot of caveats to it. But it's available, in my mind, if Rob wants to make the effort to have that technology and he feels comfortable. I don't know how much pressure we have to actually implement it in our little village. The second thing, which I found interesting and has, again, nothing to do with my area of responsibility, was that Lake County bought a house because it was in the flood zone. And we have one less house that's going to be flooded now that's in Riverwoods.
Well, to be precise, it was stormwater management, so.
Where was it in
On Deerfield Road, just a little bit east, just west of the bridge.
Right, one house in, not the one that's on Deerfield Road directly, but one more
Okay.
in.
Okay.
It's been
Thank
very
you.
wet frequently. So,
Thank you.
yes, and everybody, I do want to thank Henry because he's getting all the calls at various times of day. Anytime I do have one of these medical questions, is he's the most expertise. I tried to send him back to work for the governor because the governor wants all these former medical practitioners, and Henry has declined. So what the heck, Mr. Clayton?
No report, but I do have a question. Normally, the next meeting, we would have the first quarter results, and we'd be able to do an analysis of the results for the first quarter. Are we going to be able to get financial reports by the next meeting, or is that probably not?
Okay, Mike, I'm going to have to ask you to get closer. I could barely hear you, and I'm imagining others had problems too. Sorry.
All right. Normally, we would talk through the first quarter results at the next meeting, which could be important given the current situation. My question is, are we going to be able to get financial information by the next meeting, or does that have to be postponed?
I hope so, but we would need to talk to Nathan. Obviously, he hasn't been coming by either, but Susie has been coming in every morning, working for a while here and then working from home. So we're trying to make sure we get this and the audit still being able to go forward. But that's a question that we'll have to A, check with Susie, and B, Nathan to be sure of.
Okay, I'll do that. I have no report.
Okay. I know of no reason to go into executive session. Next meeting is April 21st, which unfortunately I assume will again be electronic. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
John, wait a second.
Oh,
Hold on,
yes.
John.
Do we
Yes,
have
I
a
hold.
technology to actually go into executive session if we needed to in the future?
Yes, what I would basically have to do is back us out of this. If we actually have anybody I have to kick out, and then I can lock it down. But yes, it is theoretically possible.
All right.
But we won't have to get together and risk anything for that. Okay, I have a motion and a second for adjournment. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey,
Good night.